Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel on my next Escape from Tarkov video. I'm going to do a quasi-loot money-making guide for customs, and then mix in some map knowledge and movement strategies. With 12.8, they changed the loot tables for caches. Now you get armor, helmets, bags, info items like SSD drives, along with all the other stuff you used to get. If you want to see specifics, head over to the wiki and check out the tables there. Those guys do a bang-up job of updating things and keeping on top of it. Because of this, the value you can get out of cache now is insane. With the customs expansion, they added a few new buildings and loot spots that have top tier loot. So now you can reliably make as much money on customs as almost any other map, but usually more with a lot less risk. I've spent quite a bit of time analyzing and checking things on this map, and I've boiled it down to what I think is a pretty steady amount you can make. So if you hit a handful of caches and get out of the map as fast as you can, you're going to net between 400,000 rubles worth of loot on the low end and over 1 million rubles on the high end. But most raids are somewhere between 500 and 550k, and all of these raids were between 8 to 20 minutes. I also did a stream one night to see how much I could make in 4 hours without using any keys on customs. I ended up netting over 7.5 million rubles, and that was with dying twice fully loaded with loot that would have been worth between 2 and 3 million. I'm going to post that whole stream tomorrow, so if you want to check out my exact routes, how I dealt with avoiding players, and I made some of my on-the-fly decisions, don't hesitate to go check that out too. So to keep this as easy to remember as possible, I'm going to give my ranking for loot areas, then go into pathing, and lastly talk about some strategies. Now I'm purposely excluding dorms and this building, which I call the Alamo, from these lists. The loot here is high tier, but both of these locations give you the highest likelihood of PvP action and running into Rashala, the scav boss for customs. So for loot areas, the best one on my list is the buildings by Factory Far Corner. The 3 buildings and 3 caches in this immediate area are some of the best loot on the map. This building here with the USEC stash is a PMC spawn location, as well as being a building stuffed full of several different kinds of loot. And you don't need the USEC stash key to get it. Downstairs, there's loose loot that consists of weapon parts, meds, barter items, and ammo. Upstairs, there's 2 sides to look at. The side with the green screen and computers has a tech spawn that includes graphics cards. There's jackets, toolboxes, and good loose loot spawns. The back room here with the shelves spawns tools, fuel, water filters, and a lot of other loose loot worth a ton of rubles. The other side's room has a bit of everything. Meds, weapons, loose loot, bags, jackets, food like sugar and stuff. And on the mannequin here, you can find a roller wristwatch on his wrist, as well as a high value spawn on the floor behind him where you can get golden chains and stuff. The boiler building, which you can also spawn in, has a dead scav, toolbox, 2 boxes up on top of the boilers, and a dedicated factory key spawn in the lockers here. You can also find the military checkpoint key on the couch next to the dead scav, so make sure you check that. Outside to the west is a van that has 2 computers in it. I almost always check these when I run by. This last building in the corner is an amazing gem. It's brand new, and it has a ton of fuel spawns, a technical supply crate, grenade cases, tons of loose loot locations, computers, green boxes, and toolboxes. I've had runs just looting this building netting over 500,000 rubles. The next best building, and it's very situational whether I loot this or not, is what I call Crack House. It's the 2-story building here that was added with the expansion. You have intel spawns, a valuable item spawn, med spawns, filing cabinets, sports bags, jackets, some miscellaneous loose spawns, and a technical supply crate just outside. If you get an intel, some augmentin or stims, and then hit the tech crate, you can very easily walk away from this area with 300,000 or 400,000 in rubles worth of loot. Next up is the caches, and I group these into 2 groups primarily. One is the area around the bus depot, and the other is around the power lines behind the military base CP. There are technically 13 caches in these areas, but I personally only frequent about 8 of them to stay out of conflicts for the most part. These are your next most valuable loot locations. The power line area, which some people call substation, power, etc., has a ton of loot concentrated into one area. There are 3 caches to check, 2 boxes that spawn weapon parts and ammo, a med case, and a key spawn for the lab's arsenal storage room. These 2 areas are my most frequented loot areas. There are a few places that aren't worth going out of your way to loot, but if you're passing them, you should stop unless you're being chased. So first off is the connexes and boxes around Scav Checkpoint. I find weapon parts for the Gunsmith quest line, good mags, and other attachments on these 2 crates. The toolbox and bag are often worth checking, and I usually find squash, crackers, and some other high-level food items on these loose loot spawns. There's also a cache in the bush over here too, but be careful when you're looting it. Sniper Scav will shoot at you here if he's in the tower and sees you. The 3 buildings between the 2 gas stations is not really great loot, but if you spawn here, often it's the best you'll get, unless you're willing to PvP to take the other buildings to the east. Now, you can get some decent loot in here, and it's quick loot because there isn't all that many places for it to spawn. In the building Sniper Scav spawns in, There's fuel, filters, and hoses that spawn by the van in the corner. There's also a black crate, loose loot spawns in this connex, and a jacket. And things can spawn on this desk or shelves here too. Between the last two buildings, down in the pit, is a cache that you can check as well. This warehouse has 2 weapon boxes, a jacket, and some loose loot on the shelves. Next to it is Warehouse 4, and along with the power switch for ZB-1013, it has a med bag, various loose loot spawns, crates, and jackets. I almost always skip this building though. I never seem to find anything that justifies the time spent there. Now, my rotation usually stays away from Old Gas because it's just too highly trafficked by PMCs and player scavs. But for the sake of completeness, I'll go over it. Old Gas has 2 loot spawns that can spawn almost anything in the game, from armor to guns to barter items. One is inside the gas station on the desk, along with some other loose loot spawns. The other is by what we call Giving Tree, which also has a med bag and a cache. There's also a weapon crate and some loose loot spawns behind the van. New gas can lead to some pretty good loot, but you can be shot from so many directions trying to leave, and there just isn't enough loot inside for me to justify going there. There is a key spawn for the Amercom medical unit on interchange in the ambulance, and the Goshen cash register key is in the bus. So if you're after those, it might be worth the risk going here. Once here, there are 2 caches in the immediate vicinity, here and here, and then a few crates, loose loot, bags, cash registers, and things like that to look through. Lastly is the old construction building next to the factory shacks. Up on top here, there's a technical supply crate, some med spawns, and a bag. If I'm passing through here, sometimes I'll run up and check real quick, but just remember, you're very exposed in several directions when up on top. Next, we'll move on to loot pathing, and these are the ones that I found to be the most effective. These take into account the most likely paths other players will take to help you avoid them. These are all spawn-based, but it boils down into 3 basic routines. So, first up, we'll start off with the field spawns, but only after you hit that like button. Go ahead, it's right there calling out for you to click on it. So there are 4 PMC spawns over here on this side of the map, and honestly, these are my favorite. You can hit up some good loot really quick, rotate to the other side of the map, and extract often without ever seeing a single PMC. So with these 3 spawns, I'll hit the 4 caches, the power line area, then rotate down to the bus depot, hitting the 2 caches along the way. Once it busts, I move a little more slowly looking for PMCs, and then loot the 3 caches here. After that, I cut through construction, and then check for Smuggler's Boat or RUAF roadblock. If I can't get out of either of those, and I've heard a ton of shooting at dorms, I'll push across the river pretty quickly and head for Crossroads. Now, if it's been pretty quiet, I kind of take this slow because usually it means there's somebody camping on bridge or hiding somewhere along the river trying to do their Shrewborn and Heaven task. If you're feeling real frisky, you can check these 2 caches by the river, but it can be a big risk. Once across the river, I never loot anything over here. I just head straight for the extract because I'm usually already pretty full of loot and there just isn't anything over here worth enough to risk all that loot. If I spawn up by this cache, I don't usually push back towards the power line. I hit the cache here, run down the hill to the one by the train, then pick up the same rotation as the other 3. The reason for this is you will often run into squads pushing to dorms if you try to go against the grain here. Now, if that's your thing, fighting juice players 1v3 or 1v5, by all means. But if you're one of those people, I don't suspect you probably really need this guide. These 2 rotations can be one of the safest on this map as long as you pay attention to the distance shots and choose your pathing to find the least likely places for players. Usually by the time you're at river, player scavs aren't in and you've already passed all the PMCs that either rush to dorms or Alamo. Next up is the spawn by ZB-1011. These spawns are honestly probably the most profitable, but harder to survive than the field spawns. I'll try to clear out these buildings as fast as I can. I just go to the closest thing first and then move building to building. Now the longer you're here, the more careful you need to be. People will rush to this area from other places because the loot is so good. Once this area is cleaned up, I'll push into field and then pick up the route from the field spawns, hitting every cache and loot spawn I can. The only thing that is different is you can't full sprint these. At this point, it's impossible to tell where players are at, and you have to constantly be looking for them till you get to your extract. If I get to a cache that's looted, I usually make a beeline for the wall at gas and get into construction as fast as I can, so I can avoid the players that were looting them. If you spawn around old gas or all these warehouses, you have a few choices to make. You can technically make it to Crack House just as fast as any of the other spawns from old gas, Warehouse 4, or the middle warehouse, but you're almost always going to run into conflict if you do that. You can also run around to the east and push the loot over here by the boilers, but you will almost always run into players. If you're successful, just pick up the rotation from these spawns. Lastly, you can loot these buildings. Use the jump over at factory shortcut, hit the bust caches, and continue that rotation. I won't usually hit caches by old gas because you usually end up getting caught up in the open field with players pushing your direction or getting head eyes by one of Rashala's goons. Lastly are the spawns on the west side of the river. If you spawn on either of these 6, you can usually get across the river, hit these caches, push up to Crack House, run through construction, then do the reverse route of the fields. I'll usually skip the Blue Conics cache because you're pretty exposed to anyone at dorms at this point. Be very slow moving once you get past Bus Depot though. When I do this rotation, I bet more than half the time I run into other cache runners coming from the other direction. Some BS, some Plex. And with all the trees and bushes, it just is a matter of patience. They're either going to hear you or you're going to hear them. So move slowly and quietly. Once I get past gas, I pick up the pace a little, hit these 3 caches, check power, and then push to ZB 1011, checking loot along the way. Now if I hear fighting or have a bad feeling about going past gas, I'll jump over factory exit and check the ZB 1012 extract. Now, if you end up with the Crossroads or Trailer Park spawns, these are about the worst spawns in the map to do loot runs. You usually have to fight through players, and often you get beat to the best loot on the map. I'll usually skip Crack House from these and just hit the river caches and run down Main Street, hitting caches and loot as I can. At this point, the rotation is the same as the rest of the river spawns, but I feel like I almost always run into more players with this. It's just how it works with the timing. Now these routes are a general guide. You need to be constantly paying attention to gunshots, what sniper scavs are alive or dead, and any huge gunfights that you might hear. Also, you don't have to do these routes. You can modify them to fit your playstyle and stage of the game. Maybe you came into PvP, you killed a few players at dorms, and the car isn't there for extract. You can pick up these rotations at any location at any point to get out with as much loot as you can fit in your bag. Just be cautious of player scavs as if you get more than 10 or 15 minutes into the raid. You also need to keep in mind where you spawned, where you're currently at, and at what point in time in the raid you're there. As the raid moves along, certain times and certain areas are more likely to have a conflict. It's just a measure of how long it takes for one spawn to run into another. One advantage you can take is to raid at night. This will reduce the number of players you run into and make it a little bit harder for you to be seen. I've had great success doing night runs, but they can get a little boring. Gear is up to you. But my favorite set is the Belt A, Belt B gear rig and the new backpack that's the F4 Terminator backpack with the tiger stripe because it gives you a great deal of space and doesn't cost a lot of money. But you should do what your budget allows you to do. Even with a scav backpack, you can make an incredible amount of money with these runs. And that wraps up this video. Thanks for watching. I really hope this was helpful. And if it was, hit that like button as it helps the channel out a bunch. Also subscribe if you want to see future content, as I do a ton of videos that are very time sensitive when it comes to the economy inside Tarkov. If you're looking for other ways to make money, I make a hideout guide as well as some barter guides that show you how to make free cash. I stream on Twitch, so you can come hang out and say hi there and ask questions, or hit up our Discord that's full of people that are eager to answer questions for especially new players. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in Tarkov.